Locally, Marian University held its own day of events to honor the life and legacy of Dr. King. Samantha Cavalli has more from Fond du Lac.
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Fond du Lac community members, as well as Marian University students, staff, and alumni, gathered at Dorcas Chapel to read aloud Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail. The letter was written in April 1963 while Dr. King was incarcerated for participating in a nonviolent protest against segregation. It was a response to a public statement of concern and caution issued by 8 white religious leaders of the South.
I have been arrested on a charge of parading without a permit. Now, there's nothing wrong in having an ordinance which requires a permit for parading, but such an ordinance becomes unjust when it is used to maintain segregation and to deny citizens the First Amendment privilege of peaceful assembly and protest.
Dr. George Kuntz of Marian University, who's also a former Packers player, says it's important to keep Dr. King's vision and legacy alive.
So we must keep those rights and privileges alive today because they are being threatened today. And we have to make sure that we don't go backwards, we continue to go forward.
Last semester, Dr. Kuntz started his scholarship program, which helps those who come from low-income families plan to seed that college is a possibility. By becoming an advocate for these students, he's providing them with opportunities they may not have had, just like his role model, Dr. King.
We've got to pay it forward, and I think if we do that, we're going to make America, Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, a better place.
Yours for the cause of peace and brotherhood, Martin Luther King Jr.
In Fond du Lac, Samantha Cavalli, Action 2 News.